Alright, so if I sound a little weird in this video, it's because I'm still kind of getting over an illness I've had this week. I feel a lot better today, but I still don't sound that good. But I'm going to go over everything I read in the month of October, which was a pretty stellar month, and then talk about my book of the month, and then go over some things that I'm thinking about reading for November. So the first one, Dream Snake by Vonda N. McIntyre. And most of these I did full reviews, and I'll put links down in the description of them if you want more information. But this was really good. It had some parts to it that were just very impressive. I really enjoyed it. And then there was a few aspects of this one that kind of let me down, but still one that I would recommend to people. It's very unique in certain ways. And then next up was The Skylark of Space by E. Doc Smith. Most people consider this the very first space opera. It's very pulpy, very dated. You can see the influence. I'm glad I read it, but it was not that great in my opinion. It was interesting to read, and to put it in that historical context of when it was written, you give it a lot more props, but it's very, very pulpy. So, and I'm not huge into kind of the pulp science fiction, but still really glad I read that one. Then I read book 3 in the Heechee saga. This is Heechee Rendezvous by Frederick Pohl. This one, after the first 2 books, I was in love. This book, I still enjoyed, but there's just some things. I'm going to do a video eventually about the whole Heechee saga, and I actually read the 4th book, so I'll talk about that a little bit more coming up. And then Animal Farm by George Orwell. This is just a classic, tiny little book. I read this in one day. Posted a review for that one. And then Jack over at Sci-Fi Finds, I had him on the channel. We both read To Open the Sky by Robert Silverberg and had discussion on this one. This had a lot of potential. In the end, we were a little let down by some of the aspects of it, but this was kind of written at a pivotal time in Silverberg's career. We talk about it in the video where he was getting back into writing science fiction, and he went into this just very prolific period of time where he wrote all kinds of amazing stuff. And so you can see kind of the seeds of that beginning in this book, but I think he kind of honed in the craft a little bit more as he went through the years. And then since it was spooky season, I read The Best of H.P. Lovecraft. Most of these I did on audiobook, like I talked about in that video. My whole life I've had a hard time getting into Lovecraft's writing, and other people like Edgar Allan Poe. I've tried to read some of their works, and there's something about it, but I really enjoyed a lot of those in audiobook format, and there was actually quite a few that I read in there that I enjoyed too. So glad I finally got some Lovecraft under my belt. I understand what he's actually writing about now and what this cosmic horror really is, because I think I was thinking it was a little bit different than what it was. And then I went ahead and read the 4th book, The Annals of the Heechee, and I was starting to get pretty let down, especially around the mid to 3/4 of the way through this book. And I wasn't sure he was going to be able to wrap everything up. I think he did. I do have a lot of thoughts on the series in general, the main 4 books. I know he wrote another book later and a little kind of collection of short stories. I probably will eventually read those, but I think coming up maybe sometime in November, I might do a spoiler-free review of the first 4 books. Just kind of because I think a lot of people read Gateway and stop there, and just kind of talk about the pros and cons of if you should read on, because I'm a little mixed, but I'm really glad I read them. It's pretty amazing overall, but you really have to put in some work to get to the end of that one in a way. And then the last book I read, I haven't done a video on this yet, but it's The Dead Zone by Stephen King. This ends up being the 70th book in this series that I'm reading through of 140 books. So this was like the halfway point. So I wanted to make kind of a special selection for this one. This is kind of the book that got me into or made me find out about the Easton Press series, and so that video will probably come out here early November in just a little bit, when I'm feeling a little bit better. So I guess since I haven't done a video on it, it's kind of a little bit of a spoiler, but this is probably going to be my book of the month. I had read this before. I remembered most of it, but there was just some really cool things that he did at the end of this book. King's not always known for his endings, but this one had a great ending. It almost made me feel like it was a precursor to 1123 or 2263 in some aspects, and I love that book. And I wouldn't call this a 5-star book, but out of everything else I read this month, that was probably the standout for me. So now let's get into what I'm going to be reading in November. So since I was sick, I actually watched the movie Stalker. I had never seen it before. It's 2 hours and 40 minutes, all subtitled. I enjoyed it, sort of, but while it's fresh in my mind, I went and checked this out from the library, Roadside Picnic, Arkady and Boris Strugatsky, so I'm going to give that a read. It's always been one that I've kind of been interested in, but since I recently watched the movie, I thought that would be a good one. Now, Sean D. Standfast, he's doing a Simic book a month. We were going to go over this, but something came up, so we're going to talk about this book next month. So I haven't started reading that yet. It's a pretty thin book. Also, me, Matt, and Richard, we've been going through these best of. Something came up there, and this is going to get pushed into November. So I've made a kind of a good chunk. It's been way better than I expected. Very interesting stories. There's even some poetry in there. One poem in particular really stands out. And then over at Liminal Spaces, I had Chris from Liminal Spaces on, and we discussed Roger Zelazny, Lord of Light. See, my brain still isn't working right. So I had him on the channel. We discussed Lord of Light, and so he's going to have me on his channel, and we're going to read and discuss The Hole in the Zero by M.K. Joseph. This is a very obscure book, very weird, interesting, trippy book. I started reading this a while ago and put it down, so I'm excited to kind of finish it, and I think I'm going to have to take notes because it was a little confusing in the beginning. And then a couple books that are on this Easton Press list that I'd like to get to. I definitely like to read Rogue Moon by Algis Budrys. This is one that I've heard great things about. And then this is a bit of a big one, Macroscope by Piers Anthony. Got this Avon edition here. I'd like to maybe finish that this month. And then something new I kind of started. I've got all these books that, a lot of them I say, I collect them because if I find them for $1 or $2 and they got a great cover, I'll buy them, but I might not ever have the intention of actually reading them. But came up with an idea, don't have an exact name for it yet, maybe the wife's pick or something like this, but my wife went through all the bookshelves and I let her pick out whatever. There was only a couple caveats, like if I had already read it, I was going to make her put it back, or if it was part of some series or something like that. But other than that, whatever she picked, I was going to read. So she picked Lewis Trimble's The Bodleian Way, and this is a DAW. And I have a feeling most of my wife's picks are going to have to do with cats somehow. So, it's a very thin book. I actually kind of started reading it a little bit. I'm going to restart reading it because I was kind of in a brain fog when I started it. But so far it was pretty interesting. So I think this would be a good way to kind of get some random books read that maybe I didn't expect to read and maybe find some great ones. So it's something we might start doing once a month, let her pick out one. But other than that, that's everything I read and going to read. So let me know what you read in October. Let me know what you're thinking about reading in November. And hopefully I sound a little bit better in the next videos, but we'll see you in the next one.